Alright, hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel and to this new type of video that I'm trying out on my channel. I haven't really talked much about role-playing games on my channel before, but role-playing games is something that I really like, and I figured I would share some of that hobby with you guys. So we're starting out with just a flip through of the Fantasy Age basic rulebook. I would like to preface this and say that it's not really a review of the Fantasy Age book or system. I haven't played this a lot, and I usually like to play through it a little bit before making a judgment, because I don't really know much about how this system works in practice. So we're just gonna have a look at the book. So this is published by Green Ronin, who based this off of their Dragon Age role-playing game. So they sort of took out the Dragon Age specific things and just made this into a generic fantasy system. So you're supposed to be able to use this with any fantasy setting that you wish. And the H here stands for Adventure Game Engine, and it is an engine that they have used for several settings now, actually, not only Dragon Age, but also, for example, you have Titan's Grave, which uses Fantasy Age, and you might have seen this one on Geek and Sundry, for example. And you also have Blue Rose. This is the new edition of Blue Rose, which is also an Age role-playing game, so it uses the same system. I haven't played neither of them actually, so can't really say much about them either. But it is an engine that Green Ronin has in a lot of their books. There's also a sci-fi variant, which is Modern Age. I don't have that book, but I am planning on maybe running some Modern Age adventures next year, so might talk about that in a year's time or something. But yeah, this is, like I said, a generic rule set for a fantasy game. So sort of like GURPS or Savage Worlds, that kind of thing. Very condensed. We have only about 140 pages of material here. So I feel that it's rather accessible to, for example, new players or new game masters, because it doesn't take that much time to read through, and you sort of get a good idea of how things work. So let's start with just flipping through here. So we get the standard stuff. You get your table of contents, your what is a role-playing game kind of thing, introduction to Titan's Grave up there, and then you get your player's guide as usual. This is, I feel, very traditional in its approach. You have your races, which are like dwarf, human, halfling, gnome, orc, etc. And also your classes, which are also the standard things like mage, rogue, and of course warrior. But I do feel that the system here is very modifiable. So, you know, you're not really bound to having these races or these classes. You know, you sort of, you can put your own flair to it if you want. This is really just to get some inspiration to get things started, I guess. So the basic rules. One of the things that sort of makes the Age system interesting is its use of stunt points. So when you roll for a test, for example, you're going to roll 3 d6s. One of them will have a different color, and then 2 will have the same color. And if you roll double, for example, 2 6s or 2 5s or 2 1s or whatever, you will get a stunt. And depending on the number on your colored die, differently colored die, you can perform a stunt. Stunt can be many things, but I kind of feel like they put a little bit extra into it. Here, for example, you have combat stunts. So if you have 1 stun point, you can, for example, do a more rapid reload. If you have 5 stun points, you can do more damage. If you have two stun points, you can threaten. So you strike a threatening pose, challenging an opponent of your choice. So I kind of feel like for the right type of players and for the right type of game masters, this will actually open up a lot of role playing and sort of narrative additions to, for example, combat here. You know, it's not just the players and the bad guys hitting each other until one of them is dead. You're actually like doing role playing stuff, and I feel that this system really opens up for that. So yeah, and then you have character options, ability focuses. I don't know why they call it focuses and not foci, but it is what it is. So things you can learn, talents, specializations you have here as well. So for example, you can become a duelist if you like, or a sharpshooter if you like. So I think quite a bit of inspiration here. You have your equipment, pretty standard stuff here, but like I said, I feel that it's very modifiable. You can use the stats here to create your own things from, so you're not really bound to just using this stuff. It's just a place for you to start with. And then you have your magic points and all that. Different kinds of magic you can learn, like air arcana or earth arcana. You know, basic magic stuff. I read through this and didn't feel very hard to understand. And here we have one of my favorite images in the book. I would like to point that out because we're going to talk more about the art later on. And here is also one that I really like. I don't like every image in this book. Yeah, and then you get a whole chapter, a rather short chapter, but a whole chapter on just the stunts, which I think is a good thing because the stunts are sort of what's special about this engine, and it needs to have a bit extra attention paid to it, I think. And then we get the Game Master's Guide. So that was the end of the Player's Guide, and we're on page 80 now, so about halfway through the book. I will say that I think the Player's Guide is the one that is the hardest to read in the book, probably, or the most challenging. I kind of felt as I was reading through it, I had to repeat some segments several times before I really understood the rules and everything, but that's fine. But the Game Master's Guide, I think, has much better flow, when I actually felt like, oh, this is a joy to read, while the Player's Guide may feel sometimes like a chore to read, but your mileage may vary there. But I want to pay some attention to this image, which they put on a full page introducing the Game Master's Guide. I don't like this image. I don't like it at all. I think it's really bad. If it had been a smaller image somewhere else in the book, I don't think I would have minded that much, but they put it on a full page here, and it's just, it's really bland. So for me at least, this doesn't really tickle the imagination that much. And also, I kind of feel, because it's so fussy, it's kind of hard to interpret. Like these things here in the background, are they strikes of lightning surrounded by clouds, or is this streams of lava that is flowing down a mountain? I have no idea, because there's no really details here that makes me able to tell what this is. And yeah, I mean, I think having your Dark Lord here introducing your Game Master's Guide, that's fine. But I don't think this is a really good image for Dark Lord. It's really dark, but it's not really dynamic, I feel like. I think you can portray darkness or Dark Lords in a much more interesting way than this, because this is... I don't know, there's just something about this image that really puts me off. And also, this is really ugly horse. I was once a horse owner. Ugly drawn horses is a pet peeve of mine, and this is an ugly drawn horse. I don't like it. And I don't really understand why they put it on a full page like this. It doesn't really deserve that. There's nothing distinguishing about it. It feels just very bland and boring, but I digress. Let's move on. So here we have the Game Master's Guide, and I think these are really good chapters. They give you lots of advice for both new and old Game Masters. And I actually feel that these chapters here could be useful to read even for players. If you're, for example, all new to the Fantasy Age system, reading this as a player will help them understand where you're coming from as a game master and sort of what they can expect from you. And in some cases, I actually feel that re-explaining some of the rules here in the Game Master's chapters actually sort of made things more clear for me. So maybe it's good to have that sort of repetition of some of the rules aspects. And I think soon we will come here to my favorite image in the book. It should be here soon. Yes, here it is, this one. I love this image. First of all, I really like how retro styled it is. I can kind of see this being cover for like a vintage sci-fi or fantasy paperback. And I also think it's somewhat reminiscent of some of the really iconic images within the RPG genre. So I like it for that. But I also think this is a really good image to put in the Game Master segment, because here you have your players who are off on adventure, meeting all sorts of danger, and you have your all-seeing Game Master here that maybe lay some traps for them or create other adventuring opportunities. So I really like this one, and I would argue that this should have been a full-page image, and it should have been the introduction to the Game Masters segment, or maybe even should have been the cover of the book, because let's have a look at that. So this is not a bad image, I think. I like it better than the Dark Lord image that we looked at before. But it is a bit dull in the colors that it uses. I mean, really the only thing that stands out is like her sword here. Otherwise, it's mostly just greens and grays and blues, and it's just... it doesn't really catch the eye, I think. Even though there's a lot of things going on here, it's not... If I'm standing in a store and I'm gonna buy a new role-playing book and I pick this one up and I'm just like, nah, it doesn't really look very interesting, and I put it back and maybe I pick up like Blue Rose or something instead. So I kind of feel like they shoot themselves in the foot a little bit with the cover image. It's not a very engaging image. I think it's a bit bland. You might even say it's a bit generic, and that might be the point because it's a generic fantasy rule system. But I feel like, for me at least, this image would have sold me more on the system than the image that they have on the cover. So that is just a personal opinion though. And then you get a bit of a bestiary here, not a huge one. They actually have a separate book now for Fantasy Age beasts and adversaries, but you get like a good place to start here with a few ones that you can put before your players. You know, a pretty varied selection, I think. And then you get some rewards, and it talks about level advancements. This has been mentioned before in the players guide segments, but here it delves a little bit deeper into like experience points and things for the Game Master. And yeah, some really cool stuff in here that you can give your players. And then it gives an introduction to campaign setting. So it talks about Freeport, which is one of Green Ronin's campaign setting that they use. We don't have a specific book for that for Fantasy Age, but they do mention in here in this segment two other books that they have published. One which is a Freeport setting specifically for the D20 system, which you can translate into Fantasy Age, and also the Pirate's Guide to Freeport, which is a system-less book. It's just a settings book, no rules or anything, so you can use that. And I mean, I added both of those books to my wish list, so they managed to sell me on Freeport at least. And then it talks a little bit about world building and useful stuff there. And it also gives you an adventure. I read through this, and to be honest, I didn't feel that it was very interesting. But if you are uncertain of where to start things, this might be a good place. I mean, if you want to do a fantasy campaign, but you sort of you don't really know how to get the ball rolling, this might be one to do that, and then you can continue building on it by your own. So yeah, that is the end of the book, and here you have the glossary and the index and all that boring shit, and the character sheet there if you want to look at it. That is the Fantasy Age basic rulebook, and I must say I'm really impressed with how much they managed to squeeze in on 140 pages, because you're not only getting a player's guide in here, you're also getting a game master's guide, a bestiary, an introduction to a campaign setting, and an adventure. So you really have everything you need to start in here, and the short length of this book is, I think, what really makes it so accessible to everyone. Whether or not you're gonna like this particular engine, that is up to you to decide. I don't really know, but I feel like the mechanics feel solid based on just reading through this book, and we'll see next year when I try out the system what I think of it then. But if you're looking for a generic Fantasy Age role-playing game, this might be one to check out. And if you have checked it out already, why don't you give a comment down below what you think of it. I know some people who love it and some people who don't, so it's somewhat up to taste, but I am eager to try it out. And comment down below if you have any thoughts, and like and subscribe as usual, and I'll see you again soon. Bye bye.